Well, this week, Major League Baseball announced their Hall of Fame class of 2017, including 3 very deserving inductees. Tim Raines gets in his final year of eligibility. Jeff Bagwell had to wait a few years, but Pudge Rodriguez gets elected in his first year of eligibility. So let's talk about the voting with a baseball writer and a member of the Baseball Writers Association and Wall Street Journal's Jared Diamond. Great to have you in studio once again, man.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, I tell you what, things have really changed, it seems like. And this year, especially, things have changed. Now, you need 75% to get into the Hall of Fame. Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, both guys tied to steroids, both got around 54%, which was up 10% from last year. What do you make of this change right now, this softening? It seems like the writers are kind of softening on the steroids era guys.
They absolutely are. We've seen that in a huge way this year with the jumps of Bonds and Clemens, and not just them. We see Ivan Rodriguez getting in on the first ballot. Now, he was never proven to be a steroid user, but lots of speculation that he may have been a user. And in the past, that would have been an automatic no.
Right.
Now he's a first ballot. Jeff Bagwell, who by all accounts should have been a first ballot Hall of Famer, took until, his 7th ballot because of speculation to use PEDs. Now he gets in. And it really started last year with Mike Piazza, with another guy in that situation.
Yeah, well, and I wonder if this softening was a result of what the Hall of Fame actually did. So this year, the Hall of Fame elected a 16-person committee created by the Hall to elect certain members in. They brought in, on their first election, Bud Selig, the commissioner over the steroids era. Do you think that the fact that the Hall of Fame has already brought in a steroids guy kind of let the writers soften a little bit on this?
Well, we know there were some writers that it absolutely did. They said immediately that this is going to change my vote for Bonds, Clemens, and others because, like you said, Bud Selig did oversee the steroid era. Whatever you think about his time as commissioner, he was the guy in charge when all of this happened. Now, I'm not sure how much of effect it had ultimately on everybody, but even if it just swayed a few people, that's enough to bounce these guys up a few points.
Well, I mean, the writers have to feel like they are the protectors of the integrity of the Hall of Fame, and maybe they were keeping some of these steroids era guys out because they thought that it messed with the integrity of the HOF.
Absolutely. We've seen that for a long time. That's why it's taken so long for these guys to get in, why other guys fell off immediately. Rafael Palmeiro, who was a suspended steroid user, didn't even make it on the ballot. Mark McGuire, he's off the ballot. That was then. We're moving into a new era with a new voting block, and it's changing these results.
Well, and it's a different electoral element to it as well. Some of the older writers are no longer a member of the Baseball Writers Association. It seems like they're getting younger. Do you think that the voters are changing?
Well, they're still in the Baseball Writers Association, but what's changing is the rules for who gets to vote for the Hall of Fame. It used to be once you got your vote, 10 years in the BBWAA, you get it forever. No longer the case. Now, if you have not covered baseball for 10 years, you lose your vote. So what does that mean? A lot of the the older writers don't have their vote anymore. The younger guys make up a larger percentage of the voting base. And we've seen that younger writers, especially writers that sort of grew up, may have been younger during the steroid era, they're more lenient.
Sure. I mean, it was an important time for some of those younger writers. That's all they knew. They couldn't compare that to the previous eras. And maybe they have a little bit more appreciation for that era of baseball.
Exactly. I can speak for myself. I'm not a voter. I've not been in long enough to have a vote, but as someone that grew up in the 90s, that's my baseball experience.
Sure.
And to me, not having Bonds and Clemens and all these guys in, it's like erasing my whole childhood of baseball. And
you don't want to do that. You want the guys that you grew up rooting for to be in the Hall of Fame, because when you want to go to Cooperstown, you want to see the history. And how can you not write the history of baseball without guys like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens?
Well, the Hall of Fame's a museum first. And to me, you need to have the context. And the context is, yes, they may or may not have done these things. A lot of guys were. We know some guys did. Maybe Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, they probably did. But there's no reason why they can't still be honored for what they did on the field in context of the era they played in and the things they may have done.
Because we're seeing that the door is clearly opening for guys like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, you have to wonder if there is a future scenario where guys like Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez will be in the Hall of Fame with steroids, a lot more of a concrete connection to steroids in their history.
Well, so far we've seen sort of a line in the sand, and it's moved. The line used to be if you've even been rumored to have used steroids, you're out. Now we've seen, okay, if you maybe have been rumored, we can't prove it, that's okay. But being suspended has still to this point been a automatic no-go. Manny Ramirez was his percentage within the 20s, really didn't get much traction. That's the guy you're comparing to Alex Rodriguez. And I don't know yet if the voters have reached the place where you actually getting caught could get in.
Well, what does it say when we will most presumably allow Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, who have continued to deny that they had any connection to the steroids, and you see someone, like Mark McGwire, who openly admitted it, and he's off the ballot. It's almost like he's not. You're never going to see him in the Hall of Fame because he admitted to using steroids. What message do you think that sends to the players?
Well, there's a lot of weird rationalizations. Some people will say, well, Bonds and Clemens would be Hall of Famers even before they'd started using PEDs, where McGwire was more one-dimensional of a player and therefore may not have been the historical great he was.
Do you buy into that logic?
I'm happy I don't have to vote. I understand the logic. I do understand saying Mark McGwire without PEDs may not have been an all-time great. On the other hand, either you think PEDs are right or you don't think they're right. I don't know. But I think there's a big difference also with Bonds and Clemens and these guys, that they were doing it before there was testing, right? Whereas Manny Ramirez, that was against the rules and there was a punishment for it and he faced that punishment. Whereas Bonds and Clemens, yes, they were not really allowed to be using steroids, but look, if a cop tells you, we are not going to pull you over, no matter how fast you drive, there are no cops here, you may not follow that speed limit.
Right, you might be doing triple digits.
And that's why I think in many ways it's harder to judge these guys pre-testing. And that was Bonds and Clemens for a vast majority of their careers, when there were no punishment, there was no real rule, there was no way to test for it if they were doing it.
And it does seem, well, clearly the Baseball Writers Association is the gatekeepers to who gets into Cooperstown and who doesn't. Should the voting process change? Should they relieve themselves of this duty? In fact, maybe the question is, do they even like the fact that they have this duty?
There's a growing movement, for sure, within individual writers or groups of writers that feel like the writers should not be the ones voting, that it's a conflict of interest, that, look, being elected into the Hall of Fame, that's a financial benefit for these players. If they could sign their baseballs, HOF, all of a sudden they make more money for those signings. And should the writers, supposed to be objective, impartial people covering them, have a stake in their financial futures, in their reputation? So there's definitely writers that believe, no, we shouldn't. Now, I don't know what the better solution is, but I also don't think that's the writers' responsibility. The writers have done this for the Hall of Fame essentially as a favor because it benefited both parties. It looked good. The writers got to say, we are the gatekeepers. We decided who's in the Hall of Fame. Now, though, all we do is get yelled at. No matter what we do, no matter who we vote for, it's wrong.
Are you sure you want to get a vote? Are you sure you want to be one of those guys?
Exactly. What's really the benefit for the writers? So the Hall of Fame loves that the writers do this because they're not the ones deciding. So whatever happens with Bonds and Clemens, they could say, well, that was their decision.
Right.
They're the ones that decide. They kind of could wipe their hands clean of it. It's their responsibility, perhaps, to come up with a better solution if the writers decide as a group not to do it anymore. I don't think we're there yet. I'm not even saying we're that close. But as time goes on and there's this movement continues to grow, especially among the younger writers, I wouldn't be shocked if we look down the road and we might be talking 10, 15, 20 years where all of a sudden it's like we are not doing this anymore.
I don't know. Things happen quickly. And the fact that the Hall of Fame created their own committee makes me think that maybe that they've dipped their toe into this, they might want a little bit more. Jared Diamond, always good having you in studio, man. Very much appreciate it. You can read all of his stuff in the Wall Street Journal. Jared, great seeing you again, man.
Thanks for having me back.
I appreciate it. All right, stick around. We'll be right back.